Everyone in the grand hall knew what was supposed to happen next. The most powerful alpha in the country would choose his omega, and everyone expected a perfect match. The room was filled with whispers, expensive perfumes, and carefully practiced smiles. But at the far end of the hall stood Soren Whitaker, the omega nobody wanted to see. He kept his hands folded, his eyes lowered, and his heart prepared for the same ending he had lived through again and again. Rejection. Soren had spent years being called a monster because people feared what they did not understand. They never saw his kindness, his intelligence, or the quiet strength that helped him survive. To them, he was only an omega who did not belong. Today, he feared losing the last place where he could stand without being completely erased. Soren never expected the most powerful alpha in the room to look directly at him. Lucy and Marlowe had every reason to choose someone else. The world practically demanded it. 3 beautiful omega triplets stood in the center of the hall, admired by everyone around them. They represented everything society valued: elegance, status, and perfection. People smiled because they believed the decision was already made. Even Soren believed it. He had learned not to hope for things meant for other people. Then Lucien moved. Not toward the triplets. Not toward the families waiting to celebrate the obvious choice. He walked past them. The entire room went silent as the alpha who controlled companies, influence, and entire industries crossed the marble floor toward the one person everyone else avoided. Soren looked up, confused. He wondered if this was some cruel misunderstanding. Maybe Lucien needed something from him. Maybe someone had sent him as a joke. But when Lucien stopped in front of him, there was no disgust in his expression. No hesitation. Only recognition. Soren Whitaker, Lucien said quietly. Hearing his name from that voice felt impossible. Soren froze. Almost nobody said his name with warmth anymore. How do you know me? He asked. Lucien did not answer immediately. Instead, he did something that shocked the entire room. He removed his own alpha insignia, the symbol that represented his power and status, and placed it aside before speaking to Soren as an equal. Because I have been looking for you longer than you realize. The words hit harder than any insult Soren had ever heard. He had spent years believing he was someone people wanted to forget. Yet this alpha was standing in front of everyone, choosing him without apology. The hall erupted with confusion. People questioned Lucien's decision. They whispered that he was making a mistake. They reminded him of Soren's reputation, the rumors, the name everyone used when they wanted to make him feel small. But Lucien did not move away. For the first time in years, Soren watched someone stand beside him instead of stepping back. Still, Soren could not accept it so easily. You don't know what you're choosing, he whispered. You know what they call me. Lucien looked at him calmly. I know what they call you. A pause. I also know they are wrong. Those words created a strange feeling Soren had almost forgotten. Not happiness. Not yet. Something smaller. Something more dangerous. Hope. Because Lucien was not looking at him like a problem to solve. He was looking at him like someone worth finding. As the ceremony continued around them, Soren realized his life had changed in a single moment. The omega who had always been left behind had finally been chosen. But one question remained. Why? Why did the most powerful alpha in the world know his name? And why did Lucien look at him like they had already shared a lifetime before this day? The day after the ceremony, Soren expected the world to feel different. He expected people to look at him differently, and he was right. The difference was that the whispers were louder than before. Everywhere he went inside the Marlowe estate, he could feel the questions following him. Why him? What did Lucien see? Was this some kind of mistake? Soren had spent years learning how to ignore cruel words, but being chosen by the most influential alpha in the country had placed him under a new kind of attention. He was no longer invisible. He was a mystery everyone wanted to solve, and Soren hated that he still did not know the answer himself. Lucien Marlowe was supposed to be untouchable, the alpha who built an empire before he turned 30, the man whose decisions could change entire companies overnight. People described him as impossible to impress, impossible to approach, and impossible to understand. Soren expected the same cold distance when Lucien arranged a private meeting with him. Instead, he found Lucien sitting alone in a quiet office, reviewing reports about Soren's background. Soren immediately became guarded. If you are looking for a reason to change your decision, you can stop wasting your time, Soren said. I know what people say about me. Lucien looked up from the papers. I am not looking for a reason to leave. The answer surprised him. Then why are you reading everything about me? Soren asked. Lucien closed the file carefully. Because everyone else decided who you were without asking. That was the first moment Soren noticed something unusual. Lucien did not speak like someone trying to own his choice. He spoke like someone trying to understand it. Later that afternoon, Soren discovered the estate staff had been instructed to prepare a new living area for him. It was not a luxurious room designed to display an Omega partner. It was a simple, comfortable space with bookshelves, a work desk, and the exact type of plants Soren kept in his old apartment. Soren stared at the room in confusion. How did you know I liked these? Lucien answered from the doorway. You looked at them during the ceremony. Soren blinked. That was it. Lucien had noticed something so small that everyone else had missed. The powerful alpha who commanded entire rooms had been paying attention to a quiet Omega standing in the corner. But Soren still did not trust easily. Kindness could be temporary. Promises could disappear. He had learned that lesson too many times. You are different from what people say, Soren admitted. Lucien gave a faint smile. So are you. The conversation ended there, but something had changed. Soren no longer saw Lucien as only the man who unexpectedly chose him. He started seeing the person behind the reputation. The person who stayed late at work because he carried too much responsibility. The person who quietly helped employees without wanting recognition. The person who remembered small details but pretended he did not care. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a formal dinner with several powerful families, one guest casually questioned whether Soren truly belonged beside Lucien. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. They saw Soren as an embarrassment. Before Soren could respond, Lucien placed his glass down and calmly interrupted. If you have concerns about my decision, bring them to me. The entire table went silent. Lucien did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His authority filled the room. But do not mistake someone being different for someone being less. Soren looked at him, surprised. Nobody had ever defended him without expecting something in return. After the dinner ended, Soren finally asked the question he had been holding back. Why are you doing this? Lucien looked away for a moment, as if searching for an answer he was not ready to share. Because when everyone else saw something they feared, I saw someone who helped me. Soren froze. Before he could ask what Lucien meant, the Alpha continued. There is a reason I recognized your name. The words changed the atmosphere between them. Until now, Soren thought this was only an unexpected choice. But now he realized Lucien's decision was connected to something deeper. Something from before. And when Lucien handed him an old photograph that had been kept hidden for years, Soren saw a memory he thought he had lost forever. The person standing beside a younger version of Lucien was him. And suddenly, the question was no longer why Lucien chose him. The question was how long Lucien had been waiting to find him again. The morning after the photograph revealed their forgotten connection, Soren could not stop thinking about one thing. Lucien Marlowe remembered him. Not as a rumor. Not as a name attached to a reputation. As a person. But that realization did not suddenly erase years of doubt. Soren still woke up expecting the world around him to change its mind. He had spent too much time being judged to believe one person's kindness could rewrite everything, especially when that person was the most powerful alpha in the country. Lucien noticed the hesitation before Soren ever mentioned it. During breakfast, while the estate staff moved quietly around them, Lucien placed a cup of tea beside Soren without asking. You always drank this when you were younger, Lucien said. Soren looked at him carefully. You remember that? Lucien looked down at his own cup. I remember more than I expected. For the first time, Soren saw something beneath the perfect image of Lucien Marlowe. The alpha everyone admired was not someone who had forgotten the past. He was someone who had carried it alone. As the days passed, their connection changed through small moments. Lucien stopped making decisions for Soren and started asking what he wanted. When meetings became overwhelming, Lucien quietly adjusted his schedule so Soren could have time away from the attention. When people stared, Lucien did not simply stand in front of him. He stood beside him. That difference mattered. Soren was not being hidden. He was being included. One afternoon, Lucien brought Soren to a charity event hosted by several influential families. Soren immediately noticed the difference between how people treated Lucien and how they treated him. Everyone approached Lucien with respect. They admired his achievements, his confidence, and the power behind his name. But when Soren entered the room, The conversations changed. Some people smiled politely while others looked away. They saw the label before they saw the person. Soren tried to ignore it. He had years of practice. But Lucien noticed. A young business representative approached them and complimented Lucien on his choice of partner before adding, "It is surprising that someone with your position would choose such an unusual omega." The words were carefully chosen, but everyone understood the insult. Before Soren could step back, Lucien responded, "You are making the same mistake everyone else makes." The room became quiet. Lucien looked towards Soren. "You see what makes him different. You do not see what makes him valuable." Then he turned back to the group. Soren is the person who improved the community support system used by hundreds of omegas this year. He created solutions that people with far more resources failed to create. Soren froze. He had never told Lucien about that work. He had never expected anyone powerful to notice. But Lucien had. He had been paying attention. The conversation changed immediately. People who once dismissed Soren began asking questions. Not because Lucien forced them to, because Lucien revealed something they had ignored. Soren was not someone standing beside power. He was someone who had earned respect before anyone gave it to him. Later that evening, Soren found Lucien outside on the balcony overlooking the city. "You did not have to say all that," Soren said. Lucien looked surprised. "Yes, I did." Soren studied him. Most people would have protected their reputation first. Lucien gave a quiet smile. "Most people do not know you." That answer stayed with Soren. Because Lucien was not defending an image. He was defending the truth. Before they returned inside, Soren noticed something on Lucien's hand. A simple ring with an old family symbol engraved into the metal. It was not the kind of jewelry worn for attention. It looked personal, important. When Soren asked about it, Lucien became quiet for a moment. "It belonged to someone who reminded me that strength does not come from being feared." Soren wanted to ask more, but he sensed the answer was not ready. For the first time, he respected the silence instead of feeling shut out by it. That night, Soren realized something had changed. He no longer saw Lucien as someone who had chosen him out of mystery or obligation. He saw someone who noticed the parts of him everyone else ignored. And Lucien realized something even more dangerous. The omega he thought he was protecting had become the one person who made him feel understood. But the next morning, their fragile peace was interrupted when Lucien received a message that changed his expression completely. The alpha who always seemed prepared suddenly looked uncertain. And Soren knew whatever was coming next would test the trust they had just begun to build. The message Lucien received that morning changed the atmosphere before either of them had time to understand why. Soren noticed it immediately. The alpha who always appeared calm, the man who could walk into any room and make everyone listen, suddenly became quiet. Not cold, not distant, just thoughtful in a way Soren had never seen before. "Is everything all right?" Soren asked. Lucien looked at him for a moment before answering. "My family has called a meeting." The words carried more weight than they should have. Soren already understood. His choice had created consequences. The powerful families who had accepted Lucien's decisions for years were now questioning the one decision they could not control: choosing Soren. The meeting took place at the Marlowe family residence, a place filled with history, tradition, and expectations. Soren felt out of place the moment he entered. Everyone around him wore expensive suits, carried famous names, and moved with confidence. He remembered being invisible. Somehow, standing beside Lucien made him more visible than ever. And not everyone was happy about it. Several family members spoke carefully, avoiding direct insults, but making their opinions clear. They questioned whether Soren understood the responsibility of standing beside an alpha like Lucien. They suggested that someone with a different background would be better suited. Soren listened quietly. He had expected this. In fact, part of him believed they were right. Maybe he was asking for too much by staying. Maybe Lucien would eventually realize everyone else had been right all along. Before Soren could excuse himself, Lucien spoke. His voice was calm, but the entire room became silent. "You are discussing Soren as if he is a decision I made without thought." Everyone looked at him. Lucien continued, "He is not a symbol. He is not an agreement between families. He is a person." The room remained quiet. Soren looked at Lucien in surprise. This was different from before. Lucien was not simply defending him because people were being unfair. He was making it clear that Soren deserved respect even when no one powerful was watching. One family member questioned Lucien directly. You are risking your position for someone you barely know. Lucien did not react with anger. Instead, he answered with something far more powerful. You are wrong about one thing. I know more about him than you ever tried to learn. Soren felt something shift inside him. For years, people had decided who he was without asking. But Lucien had done the opposite. He had looked closer. He had listened. After the meeting, Soren found Lucien alone in the hallway. You did not need to challenge them like that, Soren said softly. Lucien looked at him. Yes, I did. Soren hesitated. Why? For a moment, Lucien seemed ready to give the simple answer. Because it was the right thing to do. Because Soren deserved it. But then he said something more honest. Because hearing them talk about you like that bothered me. The confession was small, but it meant more than any grand statement. Soren realized Lucien was no longer protecting him because of a promise or a choice made in a ceremony. He was protecting him because he cared. Later that evening, they attended another public event together. This time, the atmosphere was different. People watched them closely, trying to understand what had changed. Soren noticed something unexpected. Lucien, who usually kept everyone at a distance, quietly adjusted his pace so Soren never had to walk behind him. When photographers approached, Lucien did not step forward alone. He waited until Soren was beside him. A simple action. A clear message. The world could see where he stood. For the first time, Soren did not feel like someone borrowing a place in Lucien's life. He felt like someone who belonged there. But just as they were leaving, a new announcement appeared across the screens inside the venue. The next stage of the Alpha Omega selection process had been moved forward. And according to the official notice, Lucien's final choice would soon be judged by the entire community. Soren stared at the announcement, feeling the pressure return. The world had not accepted them yet. They had only given them more time to prove they were wrong. Lucien looked at Soren and offered his hand. This time, Soren did not hesitate before taking it. But both of them knew the next challenge would not be about choosing anymore. It would be about whether they could stand together when everyone else tried to pull them apart. For the first time since entering Lucien Marlowe's world, Soren felt like he understood where he belonged. Not completely, not without fear, but enough to believe that maybe he was not just a temporary choice. Then everything changed during the final preparation for the Alpha Omega recognition ceremony. It started with small details. Things Soren could not ignore anymore. The way people lowered their voices when Lucien entered a room. The way certain officials immediately followed his instructions without question. The way even powerful families who disliked Lucien's decision still treated him with a level of caution that felt different from simple respect. Soren remembered the old family ring, the hidden documents, the messages Lucien received that always seemed to carry more weight than ordinary business problems. Something about Lucien's life did not match the image he showed the world, and Soren began to wonder if there was a part of Lucien that he had never been allowed to see. His answer came during a private meeting before the ceremony. Soren arrived expecting another discussion about public expectations, but instead he found several senior representatives waiting with serious expressions. They were not there to welcome him. They were there to reveal the truth. Lucien Marlowe was not simply the head of a successful company. He was the final successor of one of the oldest alpha leadership families in the country. His position carried influence far beyond business. His choices affected laws, alliances, and the future of the entire Alpha Omega community. The reason so many people were watching Soren was not only because Lucien had chosen an unusual partner. It was because Lucien had chosen someone who could change the balance of power. Soren listened in silence. Every word felt heavier than the last. He looked at Lucien, waiting for him to explain. You knew, Soren said quietly. Lucien did not deny it. That answer hurt more than anything else. You knew who you were choosing. You knew what this would mean for me. And you never told me. Lucien stepped closer, but Soren moved back. Not because he feared him, because he did not know if he could trust him anymore. I was trying to protect you, Lucien said. His voice was calm, but the emotion behind it was impossible to miss. If people knew who you were connected to, they would stop seeing you as yourself. They would only see your value because of me. Soren looked away. But you still made that decision for me. The words stayed between them. Lucien had protected him from the world, but he had also kept part of that world hidden from him. And Soren could not ignore the difference. For years, people had decided what was best for him without asking. He never expected Lucien, the one person who truly saw him, to do something similar. Lucien finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding. I was afraid. Soren looked back at him. The confession surprised him. Afraid of what? Lucien lowered his eyes for a moment. That if you knew everything about me, you would see me the same way everyone else does. As a title, a responsibility, a person who can never just be Lucien. That was the first time Soren saw the fear behind the power. The alpha everyone believed was untouchable was afraid of being rejected for the very thing that made him powerful. A part of Soren wanted to forgive him immediately. He understood that fear. He had lived with it his entire life. But understanding was not the same as healing. I believe you care about me, Soren said softly. But I need to know that you trust me enough to tell me the truth. Lucien had no answer. And that silence was the hardest part. The ceremony continued, but something between them had changed. They still cared. They still looked for each other across crowded rooms. But there was a distance that had not existed before. Soren was no longer afraid of being unwanted. Now he was afraid of being chosen for reasons he did not fully understand. And Lucien, for the first time, realized that protecting Soren from the world was not enough. He had to prove that he trusted Soren with the truth. As the final announcement approached, a new question stood between them. Could the bond they were building survive? The secrets that had been hidden to protect it? After the ceremony ended, Soren expected the distance between him and Lucien to grow. He thought the silence would become permanent, that the trust they had built would disappear the moment the truth became too heavy to carry. But Lucien did something Soren did not expect. He stopped trying to fix everything with power. He stopped making decisions alone. Instead, he waited. For the first time, the most powerful alpha in the room gave Soren the one thing he had always wanted from others. A choice. Days passed with no grand promises and no dramatic speeches. Just small actions. Lucien began sharing information before Soren had to ask. He explained meetings, decisions, and responsibilities that once existed behind closed doors. He showed Soren the parts of his life that were complicated and uncomfortable, not just the polished image everyone admired. Soren noticed the difference. Lucien was not trying to convince him with words. He was proving that he could be trusted. One evening, a sudden storm hit the city while they were returning from a community event. The roads became difficult to navigate, and the power briefly went out across several buildings. Soren expected Lucien to focus on security, schedules, and business concerns like he always did. Instead, Lucien stayed beside him, making sure he was comfortable before checking anything else. It was a simple thing, but Soren remembered it. The man who carried the weight of an entire organization had stopped everything to make sure one person was not left alone in the dark. Later that night, they sat in Lucien's quiet office while rain tapped against the windows. For once, Lucien was not surrounded by assistants, advisors, or people asking for decisions. He looked tired. Not physically tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying responsibility for too long. Everyone thinks being powerful means you never feel afraid, Lucien said quietly. Soren looked at him. Is that what you think? Lucien gave a small, almost humorless smile. No, I think power just teaches people to hide it better. Then he told Soren something he had never shared. Growing up, Lucien was never allowed to make mistakes. Every choice was judged by how it affected his family name. Every relationship was measured by what it could provide. He became someone everyone respected, but very few people actually knew. I thought if I showed weakness, people would stop seeing me as someone they could depend on, Lucien admitted. So I became someone nobody could reach. Soren understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. He had spent years hiding parts of himself for a different reason. Lucien hid because the world expected perfection. Soren hid because the world expected nothing from him. They were different, but the loneliness was the same. You should have told me, Soren said softly. I still mean that. Lucien nodded. I know. Soren studied him for a moment. But I also understand why you were afraid. That was the first step. Not forgetting. Not pretending nothing happened. Understanding. The next morning, Soren saw another side of Lucien. A group of employees had been questioning whether Soren truly contributed anything to the organization. Instead of dismissing them with authority, Lucien invited Soren to present his ideas directly. He did not speak for him. He created the opportunity for Soren to be heard. Standing in front of people who once doubted him, Soren realized something important. Lucien was no longer protecting him because he thought Soren was fragile. He was standing beside him because he believed Soren was capable. After the meeting, Lucian quietly told him, "You were never someone I needed to save." The words stayed with Soren because they changed everything. Their connection was no longer built on rescue or obligation. It was built on respect. That evening, Soren returned the old photograph Lucian had shown him. "I think I understand now," he said. "You were not looking for someone from the past." Lucian looked at him. "No, a pause. I was looking for the person who reminded me who I wanted to become." For the first time since the truth was revealed, Soren smiled without hesitation. But before they could enjoy the fragile peace they had rebuilt, a new message arrived from the Alpha Council. The final recognition ceremony would no longer judge only Lucian's choice. It would now investigate whether Soren was truly worthy of standing beside him. The world had accepted that Lucian chose him. Now it wanted to decide whether Soren deserved to stay. The day of the final recognition hearing arrived with a feeling Soren could not explain. He had survived rejection, rumors, and years of being treated like someone who did not belong. But this felt different. This time, he was not standing alone. He had Lucian beside him. Or at least, he believed he did. The hall was filled with influential alpha families, community leaders, and people who had spent weeks questioning whether Soren deserved his place. Soren expected criticism. He expected doubt. He did not expect the screen behind the council members to light up with his own face beside Lucian's name. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. Then the documents appeared. A private agreement. A formal arrangement between Lucian Marlowe and Soren Whitaker. The words were carefully selected to make it look like their relationship was nothing more than a strategic partnership. A way for Lucian to protect his position while gaining public support. The room changed instantly. The same people who once questioned Soren's worth now looked at him with suspicion for a different reason. They believed he had planned everything. They believed he had used Lucian's power to escape his reputation. Whispers spread across the hall. The Omega everyone once called worthless was now being accused of manipulating the most powerful alpha in the country. Soren felt the familiar feeling return. That old fear. The feeling of being judged before anyone knew the truth. But this time it hurt more. Because the person connected to those accusations was the one person he had finally trusted. Soren looked toward Lucian. He waited for him to speak. He waited for the person who had stood beside him when everyone else stepped away. But Lucian remained silent. For one painful moment, the entire world disappeared except for that silence. Soren did not know why Lucian was not answering. He did not know if he was protecting him, thinking, or simply choosing not to fight. And that uncertainty hurt more than the accusations themselves. "Is it true?" someone asked. Soren looked at Lucian again. The alpha's expression was controlled, but Soren could not read him anymore. Not like before. Not when they shared quiet moments. Not when Lucian admitted his fears. Not when he said Soren was someone he wanted to find again. All Soren could see now was the possibility that he had misunderstood everything. Maybe Lucian had chosen him because it was useful. Maybe every moment they shared had a reason he did not know. The thought broke something inside him. Before anyone could question him further, Soren quietly stepped away from the crowd. He did not run because he was ashamed. He left because staying felt like begging someone to prove he mattered. Outside the hall, the cold air reminded him of the first day Lucian chose him. Back then, he had been afraid of being rejected. Now he was afraid of something worse. Being chosen for the wrong reason. A few minutes later, Lucian found him. But Soren did not turn around. "Tell me I am wrong," Soren said quietly. "Tell me I was not just another decision you made because it was necessary." Lucian looked at him, and for once, the powerful alpha had no immediate answer. Not because he did not care. Not because he wanted to abandon him. But because the truth was more complicated than Soren knew. The agreement existed, but not for the reason everyone believed. Lucian had to reveal everything. The problem was that doing so would expose a part of his world that could change Soren's life forever. Soren saw the hesitation. And hesitation felt like confirmation. "I understand," Soren whispered. "I think I finally understand." Lucian took a step forward. "Soren, wait." But Soren shook his head. "I trusted you because you were the one person who saw me differently." His voice became quieter. "I cannot lose that by pretending this does not hurt." Then he walked away. For the first time since their connection began, Lucian did not follow immediately. He stood there, watching the person who had changed his life disappear into the crowd. The alpha who had faced entire companies, families, and impossible decisions. Suddenly faced the one thing he feared most, losing the person who made him feel human. And as the hall waited for Lucien's response, everyone believed they had finally proven Soren did not belong. They did not know Lucien was about to make a choice that would change how the entire world saw them both. The hall was silent when Lucien Marlowe returned. For the first time in years, the most powerful alpha in the room did not walk in carrying the confidence of someone who already controlled the outcome. He walked in carrying the weight of a choice. Everyone expected him to defend his reputation. They expected him to protect his family name, his position, and everything he had built. Nobody expected him to put all of it at risk for Soren. Soren stood near the back of the hall, still hurt, still unsure if he could believe anything anymore. He had spent his entire life fighting against the idea that he was not enough. Now he faced a different fear. The fear that someone finally choosing him had only been temporary. Lucien looked toward him first. Not the council, not his family, not the people waiting for an explanation. Him. Then Lucien stepped forward. Before anyone judges Soren, they should hear the truth. The council members exchanged uncertain looks. Lucien placed a folder on the table in front of them. Inside were the original records of the agreement that had been displayed earlier. The document was real, but the story built around it was not. Lucien explained that the arrangement had been created months earlier by his family advisors as a political protection measure. They believed Lucien needed a public partner to prevent other families from controlling his future decisions. The agreement existed because powerful people tried to control him, but they had removed the most important detail. Soren had never signed it. He had never requested anything from Lucien. He had never used the situation for personal gain. Then Lucien revealed the evidence that changed everything. The altered version shown to the public had been edited by members of the council who wanted Soren removed because they feared Lucien's choice would change the old system. The people who accused Soren of manipulation had created the very deception they claimed to expose. The room changed instantly. The whispers that once followed Soren turned toward the people who had spread them. Lucien did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The evidence spoke for him. You wanted everyone to believe Soren was here because of my power, Lucien said. But the truth is that he was valuable before anyone knew my name. He turned toward Soren. He built his own reputation. He helped people who could give him nothing in return. He earned respect long before this room decided to offer it. Soren felt the same hall that once made him feel invisible finally see him. Not as an Omega chosen by an Alpha, not as someone protected by a powerful name. As Soren Whitaker, a person with his own worth. One of the council members tried to defend their actions, claiming they only wanted to protect tradition. But the evidence had already changed everything. Their position was questioned. Their influence weakened. The trust they spent years building disappeared because they had used fear and dishonesty to maintain control. Then Lucien did something nobody expected. He removed the family insignia from his jacket, the same symbol that represented generations of responsibility. He placed it on the table beside the documents. If protecting this name requires abandoning the person who deserves the truth, then I have no reason to carry it. The room went completely still. Soren looked at him, realizing what this meant. Lucien was not simply defending him. He was choosing him with consequences attached. Lucien, Soren whispered. The Alpha finally looked at him without the weight of the entire world between them. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning, Lucien said. But I need you to know something. Whatever started because of circumstances is no longer about circumstances. His voice softened. I choose you because you are the person who sees me when everyone else only sees what I represent. For the first time since the misunderstanding began, Soren believed him. Not because Lucien had saved him, but because Lucien had trusted him enough to risk losing everything. Soren stepped forward and stood beside him, not behind him. The difference mattered. He was not asking to be protected anymore. He was choosing to stand with someone who had chosen him first. The room that once questioned whether Soren belonged now had its answer. But as they left the hall together, Soren knew one thing remained unfinished. The world had finally accepted their choice. Now they had to decide what that choice meant for the two of them when there was no audience left watching. The morning after the recognition ceremony, Soren returned to the same grand hall where his entire life seemed to change. The marble floors were polished, the lights were bright, and the same place that once made him feel like he did not belong now felt completely different. Not because the room had changed, because he had. Months earlier, Soren had stood at the edge of that hall believing he was someone people would always reject. He had lowered his eyes, prepared himself for another disappointment, and accepted that being unseen was safer than being hurt. But now he walked forward without hiding. He was still the same person. He was still thoughtful, still gentle, still someone who cared more about helping others than gaining attention. The difference was that he finally understood his own value. He no longer needed the world to choose him before he could choose himself. Lucien noticed the change immediately. The alpha who once tried to protect Soren by carrying every burden alone had learned something important. Love was not about deciding what was best for someone else. It was about standing beside them and trusting them. In the weeks after the ceremony, Lucien proved that change through actions. He opened the family systems that had always operated behind closed doors and allowed Soren to participate in decisions that affected Omega communities. He did not place Soren beside him as a symbol. He gave him a voice. He listened when Soren disagreed. He asked for his opinion before making choices. For someone like Lucien, who had spent his entire life being responsible for everything, learning to share control was not easy. But he did it because Soren was not someone he needed to protect from the world. He was someone he wanted to build a future with. One evening, they returned to the small garden where Soren had once spent quiet moments away from everyone watching him. Lucien stood beside him, no longer wearing the expression of a man carrying an entire empire on his shoulders. "Do you remember what you said when we first met again?" Lucien asked. Soren smiled slightly. "I asked why you chose me." Lucien nodded. "And now you know the answer?" Soren looked across the garden, thinking about everything that had happened. The rumors, the fear, the secrets. The moment he thought he had lost the only person who truly saw him. "I think I do," Soren said. "You did not choose me because I was different. You chose me because you saw who I was." Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And you were the first person who saw who I was." That was the truth they had both needed. Lucien had been surrounded by people who respected his title but ignored his heart. Soren had been surrounded by people who judged his differences but ignored his kindness. Together, they had learned that being chosen meant nothing if they could not also choose each other freely. Later that year, the two of them returned to the same hall for a new ceremony. This time, there were no expectations forced upon them. No political decisions. No family pressure. No need to prove anything. When Lucien reached for Soren's hand, Soren did not hesitate. He was not accepting a place someone offered him. He was accepting a future he had decided he deserved. The people who once called Soren a mistake now knew the truth. The person they ignored had become the one everyone respected. The alpha they believed could never change had become someone who learned how to open his heart. And as they walked out together, past the same doors where Soren once stood alone, he realized something that completed the journey he never expected to take. He had spent years waiting for someone to see his worth, but the greatest change was learning that he had always possessed it. Lucien did not save him from being forgotten. He reminded him that he was never someone worth forgetting.